Good evening, children. Welcome to class 8th science. So in today's class, we are going to study the next concept is fluid friction. Means a friction exerted by liquids and gases. See, in last class, we have studied the friction exerted by the different kind of solid and all. So now in today's class, we are going to study like liquids and gases also can exert some kind of friction. So that friction is called as fluid friction. Okay. So before we describe fluid friction, we should know the meaning of term called as fluid. Understanding. So if it comes to the fluid, those substances which are able to flow easily, understanding, which are able to flow easily, are you understanding, easily, are called fluids. So fluids have no fixed shape. They don't have any kind of fixed shape. So depend upon the where we are storing, depend upon the container. It will if you shift to one container to another container, the shape of the fluids also will changes. So according to that, depends upon the shape of the container, these fluids can change their shape. Change the means according to the container, it can they can modify. That is why we can say that they don't have a fixed shape. No fixed shape. So liquids and gases are fluids. We can say that the examples for fluids is liquids and gases, because we know that they can flow easily. So both the liquids and gases can flow easily. So that is why we can say that they are fluids. So the most common liquids around us is what? It is water. So water is a what? Water is a fluid, because water can flow. So the most common gas, or else a mixture of gases which is around us, is what? Air. So these are the most common fluids which is present in the form of liquid state, in the form of gaseous state. So air is also a fluid. Thus, water and air are the most common fluids. So we can say that there is a friction whenever an object moves through a fluid. So that is called as fluid friction. So whenever some kind of object will goes through or moves through a fluid, any kind of water or air, then that they will exert some pressure, friction. So that friction is called as fluid friction. Okay. So air is a very light and thin, yet it exerts a frictional force on objects moving through it. Understanding, which opposes their motion. Understand? So when an object moves through the air, it pushes the air out of the way. Suppose here everywhere air is present. So when some object, suppose I am walking, means what I'm going to do? I am pushing the air towards two sides. Because whatever the air present in front of mine, if I need to walk, means definitely I need to push that air back. Then only I can able to move forward. If not, I cannot. So it pushes the air out of the way, and the air pushes back on the objects. If we're trying to push the air like this, then air also will trying to push us back. But we are dominating that force of friction. That is why we are moving forward. Okay. So thus an air exerts a frictional force on any kind of objects like cars, buses, aeroplanes, rockets, and birds, including birds, etc. So moving through it. Whenever these kind of objects and even animals, when they are moving through the air, definitely air exerts some kind of frictional force. Similarly, if it comes to the water, or else any other kind of liquids also will exert force of friction on objects which move through them, and it will oppose their motion. Understand? So when an object moves through water, it pushes the water out of the way, and water pushes back on the object. Means if you're trying to push the water sides, then water is also trying to push us back. Okay. So this push of water on the moving objects creates a friction which tends to slow down the moving object. So what is going to happen? Suppose, for example, you are cycling on a road. Now you have start pedaling. You have completely stopped the pedaling, but even you are not even applying the brakes. But if you are trying to move on road, definitely after traveling certain distance, slowly your speed will reduce. Finally, even though without pedaling, understanding, without pedaling and without applying brakes, our bicycle will comes to rest, because of slowly the air friction is increasing. So at certain situation, air friction will dominate our friction. So definitely we will become our bicycle will become stop. because of air friction. That is why, if not, then continuously it will be in motion on. So the push of water on the moving objects creates a friction which tends to slow down the moving objects like air. So thus water exerts a frictional force on objects like boats, speedboats, ships, submarines, and even including like animals, fish and all, etc., which moves through it. So whatever the objects or else animals which will move through the water will exert some kind of frictional force on that object. So from this discussion, we can conclude that air and water both exert force of friction on objects moving through them. So since air and water are what? Air and water are fluids. Understanding? So in general, we can say that fluids exert force of friction on objects moving through them. Objects moving through them. Are understanding? So the frictional force exerted by a fluid, means air or water, is called, basically we used to call it as drag force. What we used to call? We used to call it as a drag, or else we can say that drag force. Drag force. So the frictional force which is created by the fluids like air and water is called as drag force. This is just a name for the frictional force. Understanding? So thus a drag is a kind of frictional force exerted by a fluid like air and water which opposes the motion of an object through that fluid. Understanding? So a drag force acting in a what? Acting direction opposite to the direction of motion of the object. Means if the object is moving like this, means right side, then the drag force is acting opposite to this. So a drag slow down the object moving through fluids and makes speeding up harder. Understanding what I'm saying? This drag force or drag slow down the object moving through fluids and makes speeding up harder. Means if you want to increase the speed, it will make it very hard. So the typical understanding examples of drag force are the air resistance force experienced by a car or an aeroplane when they move at high speeds. Understanding? High speeds. And then a water resistance force experienced by a speedboat moving rapidly in the sea. Understanding? So here we can feel that. So even you can see that suppose you are cycling, suppose for example, if you want car, means you can sit inside, so you may won't feel that frictional force, drag force. Suppose you are cycling and the wind is also coming the same direction, the direction opposite direction which we are moving. Suppose I am cycling in this way, but a few times you can see that we are unable to cycling because air force is coming opposite to us because of over speed of air. Then it is very hard to climb, very hard to cycling, because of by the time air resistance is too much. So this resistance of air is called as drag force or else a drag. So this is only what we used to call a frictional fluid friction. Understand? So the magnitude of frictional force or drag exerted by a fluid on an object moving through it depends on majorly of 4 factors that we are going to study now. So totally the 4 factors which will influence us the magnitude of frictional force exerted by any kind of air or water fluid on an object moving through it. Understand? So you just keep heading that. What is the next concept? That is the 4 factors. You just the magnitude of frictional force or else a drag exerted by a fluid on an object moving through it depends on 4 factors. So what are the 4 factors? The first one is, the first factor which will influence us the magnitude of frictional force is speed of the object. What is speed of the object? Speed of the object. I like that. The next one is what? Shape of the object. Shape of the object. Shape of the object, like that. Next one is size of the object. Size of the object, like that. The last factor which will influence us the magnitude of frictional force is nature of the fluid. What it is? Nature of the fluid. Understanding? So these are the 4 factors which will influence us. So here the nature of the fluid means viscosity of the fluid. So viscosity means the resistance to flow, the thickness. Suppose you can see that oil, any kind of a coconut oil, something you can take, and water you can take. You just try to keep your 2 fingers and you can see that Water, it cannot be stick to our hand, but oil can stick to our hand, like honey also. Because oil is high viscous. Honey is like, so for example, if you take any oil or honey is highly viscous. Means if you pour on floor, both 1 liter of water and 1 liter of honey, which can travel more distance? Definitely water can travel more distance, because it is having it is a low viscous substance. Viscous means the resistance to flow. Understanding? So I can say that honey is a highly viscous substance because it can travel very less distance. So it is very sticky in nature. So that is called as viscosity. So the nature of fluid means viscosity of the fluid. Viscosity of the fluid. Understanding? So viscosity means what? The flow, the resistance to flow. Viscosity, SITY. Viscosity, VISCO, Viscosity means the flow or the resistance of flow. Resistance of flow. Understand? So higher the speed, first let me come to the first factor, speed of the object. So higher the speed of an object moving through a fluid, greater will be the frictional force or else a drag force on it. Are you able to understand? If the speed of the object is more, then the drag force exerted by that object due to the fluid also will be more. For example, if we take an aeroplane flying at a very high speed of, let me imagine it's like 1,000 kilometer per hour, 1,000 kilometer per hour, then it will face a greater frictional force or it's a drag force of air than any other similar aeroplane which is flying at a lower speed of, let me imagine that 600 kilometer per hour. So if you consider the two aeroplanes which are flying at very high altitudes, with one is with 1,000 kilometer per hour and second one is 600 kilometer per hour. So this 1,000 kilometer per hour aeroplane can feel a more air resistance, because we know that higher the speed of an object then moving through a fluid, then the greater will be the frictional force or else a drag force acting on it. Okay, like that. The next one, the objects having a streamlined shapes. So I will explain you what is streamlined space. That is what is the second one, shape of the object. Shape of the object. So the objects having a streamlined shape face much less frictional force. You just imagine, this is what is a streamlined structure. I will say that ST, understanding, REAM, STREAM, streamlined shape. This is the most important shape while you are designing some kind of machineries, aeroplanes, cars and all. This is the most important one. Even like a navy boats and all, they all will be designed with the shape of a streamlined shape. I will explain you what is that shape. Streamlined shapes. So if you design objects in the form of a streamlined shape, then it will face much less frictional force or else a drag when moving through a fluid than the objects which do not have a streamlined shape. Means if any kind of object, if it is having a streamlined shape, then definitely it will feel the less drag force compared to the object which do not have a streamlined shape. For example, if you take a car has a streamlined shape, like a wedge it will be. So car will be basically, if you observe any kind of a car, understanding, so the car shape will be like this. Understanding? So like this kind of shape is called as, this is called as a wedge shape. Wedge. So let me consider, I will draw you more clearly what is streamlined body. Understanding? So due to which it faces, let me imagine a car has a streamlined shape like a wedge, due to which it faces much less frictional force of air or else air drag while running at high speed. Understanding? Suppose if you take a bus, bus does not have a streamlined shape because bus is in the form of like a rectangle. Is it cut or not? Almost it is looking like a rectangle. Then this bus will feel more frictional force as air drag force compared to this car, because this kind of shape of a car is called as streamlined shape, but this is like a rectangle. So here it will feel more air drag force. Understanding? So while running at a high speed, a bus does not have a streamlined shape, so it encounters a much greater frictional force or else a drag force from air while running at the same speed. Now car and bus are both running at the same speed, but this bus will feel more air frictional force. Okay, like that. The next one is size of the object. So larger the size of the object moving through a fluid, greater will be the frictional force. Means if the size of the object is increasing, means then the frictional force acting by it, means the drag force acting on it is also increasing, means greater. For example, if you take a big aeroplane flying at a particular speed will face more frictional force of air or else a drag than a small aeroplane flying at the same speed. So we are having two kinds of aeroplanes now. One is big one, and next one is what? Small one. So a big aeroplane can face a larger amount of, greater amount of air force or else air drag force compared to the small aeroplane. Means the size of the object is increasing, means and the frictional force, fluid friction acting on the object is increases. Okay, so like that, the last factor which will influence the drag force is higher the viscosity, means the thickness we can call it. Viscosity means the thickness. Higher the thickness of the fluid, then greater will be the frictional force acting on a object moving through it. Understanding? So for example, now any kind of object, let me imagine one object is same kind of object. One is floating on, or else one is moving in a water, and another one is moving in a, some other kind of liquid, like some, like let me imagine glycerin, or else some kind of coconut oil, some kind of cashew nut, something different kind of oil. Understanding? So custard oil, something you just take. So here if you'll see that compared to the water, these different kind of oils is having a little bit high thickness, means their viscosity is much more. So then the same object, even though water is much more, understanding, viscous than air. Suppose if it comes to the water and air, water is much higher viscous than air. So there will be a much more frictional force on an object when it moves through water than when it moves through air. Or else if you consider water and glycerin, glycerin is this density is more. Understand? Means it is having a more weight. The viscosity is more. So when the same object is traveling in water, it will feel less drag force. When the same object it will travel in the glycerin, then it will feel more viscous, more drag force. Like that, the same object when it is traveling on the road, means air and water, then in water this object will feel, compared to the air resistance, here the water resistance, means water drag force is much more. So these are the four factors which will influences the fluid friction. Understanding? So now the next we are going to study disadvantages of fluid friction. What are the disadvantages of fluid friction? See here, we don't have any kind of advantages. We are having only disadvantages. Everything is reducing. Everything is influencing our efficiency. So that is why we are going to study the next concept is what? Disadvantages. Disadvantages of fluid friction. Disadvantages of fluid friction. So the main disadvantages of fluid friction are two. In that, the first one is fluid friction reduces the speed of objects. Understanding? Because of this fluid friction, unnecessary fluid friction, the objects moving through the fluids, the speed of this is reducing, and it makes speeding up harder. Understanding? So fluid friction reduces, understanding, reduces the speed of objects moving through it. Speed of objects moving through the fluids. Understanding? Means it will make very harder, makes speeding up very harder. Like that, the next second disadvantage of fluid friction is when objects move through fluids, like means in air or water, anywhere, when it will start moving, then they lose some of their energy in overcoming the fluid friction. So this decreases the efficiency. So they will lose some energy. They will lose some energy in overcoming friction. Overcoming the fluid friction. Overcoming the fluid friction means this will decreases the efficiency. Understand? So these are the main two disadvantages of fluid friction. So for example, if we take, when a car is running on the road, then some of the energy, means which we are fueling, either petrol or diesel, whatever it may be. So this petrol, understanding? So this petrol of car is used up or lost in overcoming the friction of air which opposes its motion. Understand? So similarly, when a speedboat, if you'll take a speedboat rushes through water, then some of its energy means we will pour a diesel or something, diesel boats or something, petrol boats, whatever it may be, fuel. Then it is used up or lost in overcoming the friction of water. So in order to improve speed and to reduce the loss of energy, means loss of energy means in the sense of what fuels, efforts are made to reduce or minimize the fluid friction, or else we can say that drag force. Understand? So many kind of efforts we have to take care to reduce this drag force. So before we discuss how fluid friction can be reduced, we should know the meaning of the term called as streamlined or streamlined shapes. So I have already told you streamlined shapes or else a streamlined shapes. Understanding? A streamlined shapes. So what is the meaning of a streamlined or a streamlined shape? Means a body shape which offers a very little resistance to the flow of air or water around it is called streamlined or else a streamlined shape. Are you able to understand? So a particular type of a shape of a body which will minimizes the understanding a little, very little resistance to the flow of air or water around it is called as streamlined or streamlined shape. A streamlined shape is like a thin wedge or else a triangular object. A thin triangular object means a triangular is looking like a very thin object. A wedge or thin triangular object. Understanding? I will draw a particular shape. Suppose, for example, streamlined, for example, streamlined car means you can see that most of the cars will be like this. You can see if you notice it. So, understand? So you can see. So this kind of shape is called as streamlined shape. Understand? So here, if you observe, air will go like this. Understanding? So here effect is very, very less. So this kind of shapes is called as streamlined shape. So a streamlined shape is like a thin wedge, or else we can say that a thin triangular object. So lying on its base and sloping upwards gradually. Sloping upwards gradually. So if you draw here like it is, see, sloping upwards very gradually. This kind of object shape is called as streamlined shape or else a streamlined body is. So with this, I'm going to end this today's session. In next class, we are going to study the methods of reducing this fluid friction, because we don't have any kind of advantages of fluid friction. So we are having a disadvantage of fluid friction. So we have to find it. We have to make some kind of efforts are made to reduce or minimize the fluid friction. So in next class, we will study what are the methods of reducing fluid friction. So with this, I'm going to end. Thank you.